Hey there, thanks for checking out this video. Earlier today I did a live stream where I painted an outer space scene with acrylic paint. I got a whole bunch of leftover paint, so I thought I'd put together a little video just kind of walking through how I did some of those things. I got a whole bunch of colors out here today. You might not have the same colors, but a good variety of colors would be helpful for something like this. I'm going to be kind of sticking with cooler colors, black and blue and some purples, and maybe get into a little bit of reds and pinks along the way. I've got pretty standard brushes that I like to use here, just some medium-sized flat brushes. I've got one that's kind of soft and one that's a little bit more firm. I got some water and some paper towel handy, an 11 by 14 canvas. So I'm going to get started. And like most of my paintings, when I start out, I just like to lay out the colors and just get an idea of where things belong. For this outer space scene, I don't need a whole lot of detail at any point. I just want pockets of color and lots of different little cloud effects. So to start, I'm just going to create some basic gradients where I want bright spots and dark spots. So when you make something like this, you can decide where you want those colors in your painting, and you'll kind of see as I go here. I'm going to work in some different colors here and there and see what happens. It's a lot about just seeing what happens and working with stuff as it happens. So I started with some black, I put in some of my light blue. I'm blending it together, but I'm not being very particular at all. And just have some very basic brush strokes where I just push the color together a little bit, but try not to over mix stuff. I don't want everything to be one solid color here. I really want to make in this first layer. I can't really worry about anything looking too perfect, too finished. Just want to get some color established. So I've got some light blues. I grabbed a little bit of purple here. And maybe I change up my brush stroke from time to time, all for the same reason, just to see what happens, just get some things happening on the canvas. Don't have to plan everything. Maybe a little bit of white in here. There we go, and I got all these shades of red here on my palette. I'll get some of those incorporated here. And pretty much every time I put my brush down into my palette here to grab paint, I'm changing up what I put on my brush, just getting different combinations of colors, combining colors, once again just to see what happens. And I'm going to maybe start to get darker here down towards the bottom. And a lot of freedom painting something like this. You'll see as we work through here, you can really make things wherever and however you want. It's not like trying to paint something from life where you need it to look like what you're looking at, or trying to represent something very realistically. Alright. So those sirens must mean that I'm going to just take a 5-minute break and let this dry. So that was just a quick first layer. When it's dry, I'll come back on top of it and start to bring it to life some more. Alright, well, I've let this dry for about 10 minutes, and what I want to start doing now is going back on top of that first layer and creating a little bit more detail in my brush stroke. I use the word detail for lack of a better word, but what I just want to do is soften some of my transitions of color. So I'll use some of the same colors I've been using and just go back on top of what I've got started here. I switched to a more firm brush. Nothing special about it other than it's just the bristles are a little bit more firm, and the way that I rub it on the canvas will create that soft effect that I'm after. So I'm just going to start kind of in the same area that I did in the first place with my dark colors. And the brush stroke I'm using now is just kind of a soft rubbing or scrubbing motion, a circular motion, and it'll pretty much continue like that for most of this layer. So I'll just kind of follow along with some of the same colors. And just like my first layer, I'm not being too particular with where colors go. My whole goal here is just to get variety of color. And I'll probably say it 5 more times before this video is over, but a lot of this is just see what happens. Just see what I end up with. Keep the cool stuff, get rid of the stuff that doesn't look as good. So I'm just swirling my brush around. I'm picking up more color as I go, and when I do, I'm changing up that color so that my whole painting doesn't just stay one old color. So I've got a whole variety of colors here on my palette, and I'm just, switching back and forth between the main 2 or 3 here, my light blue and my light purple, maybe a little bit of white from time to time. And if I get little amounts of these colors mixing together, I get all these intermediate colors along the way. And that's the whole idea, just create lots of variety. As I go here, I'm putting more paint on my brush frequently, but it's just little bits of paint. When I'm trying to create these soft blended colors, I don't want to use a ton of paint. If I put a whole load of paint on the canvas, it's got to go somewhere and I got to do something with it. So if I just use little bits, then I stay more in control of where the colors go. Bring in some more dark color up here. It's what makes these kinds of paintings so much fun. There's no right or wrong. Just any colors go. Let them mix together. See what happens. Now, depending on what you ended up with your first layer, there might be parts of that first layer that look good right away. You don't have to go back over them. So spots that already look good, just pay attention to what's happening on your canvas and don't feel like you have to paint over everything. So occasionally you'll see me wipe off my brush. That's just if I want to go into a different color, like in this particular spot I want to use a little bit more white and some of my red to get some sort of pink and light purple tones. I just want to start fresh, so I'll wipe off my brush. And as I move around and use different colors, my brush stroke is pretty consistent with that swirling motion, but I'm trying to avoid creating a pattern with where I put colors down or keeping colors too separate. I'm going to let everything intertwine and connect. Just trying to avoid making stripes on the painting or little circles or pockets, areas that have boundaries where one color stops and the other one begins. Keep going with some of my red and pink colors down here. As you progress through painting like this, like I said, you'll have to kind of see what materializes on your canvas. Maybe you have a plan or a reference image that you're working off of, and that can be helpful if you want to make something that looks like a particular formation or certain colors you want to use, that can be helpful. I'm just kind of going along here and seeing what happens. What I do know that I want to create is some contrast in here where I have something dark playing against my light colors, and that's a good strategy in most paintings, no matter what you're painting. So I'm going to sort of have my light color here transition back into my dark, and then later on I can have some of these dark colors overlap this lighter area to create that contrast. So the neat thing about acrylic paint too is this layer down here that I started with where it's dark, it's dry. So now when I come back on top of that with just a little bit of paint on my brush, and I use this very soft scrubbing brush stroke, the acrylic paint has some transparency to it, so it's going to show that dark color through it. So if I just use a little bit of paint and just lightly scrub my brush around, let my brush skip and dance around, that dark color is going to stay, revealing itself through this color, and it gives me all these neat little illusions of shape and makes these brush strokes kind of look like clouds. So I can play with that. I don't have to have that happening everywhere, but definitely looks neat where it's happening. Grab a little bit of black down here. There. So I'll just quick rinse off my brush here, and that completes 2 layers. My second layer here starts to smooth colors together. I have a better sense of where my light and dark areas are. And although I can see my swirling or scrubbing brush stroke, that initial set of brush strokes I started out with are pretty much gone now. They're all smooth together. So another layer on top of what I've got here will start to accentuate some of the things that I have going on. If I've got some real light areas, I want to preserve them or make them brighter, I'll work with that. So I kind of play with what's happening here. My dark areas I can build back on top of, and then I mentioned creating some contrast. I'll bring some of this dark stuff out on top of the lighter areas. So just to get started here, maybe I'll give a quick example of that. If I go into some of these darker reds, just get a little bit of that paint on my brush, and just to create some of these same cloud-like formations or some spacey atmospheric gas-like formations, I'm just going to set the brush on the canvas and just kind of twist it around, and I'm rolling it between my fingers, and I'm also sort of tilting and changing the angle of the brush so that the result I get is just very free and random. I don't have any particular shapes. I don't have any real solid lines or edges. It's just very purposefully random. And you can definitely control that and decide where you want these shapes and colors to go, but the end result is very loose, and in this case very space-like, these cloud formations. So I'll stick with some of those darker colors, and I'm just going to have some of this dark stuff wander out in front of my light colors. And at this point I should start to get some effect of some depth and some distance in my painting as these colors create some contrast. So when I'm painting something like this, I'm certainly just seeing what I get and rolling with it. I'm trying to recognize what's already on my canvas and work with things. It's not completely random, but my brush stroke is just flopping around, so I never really know what my result is going to be. Just kind of run with things. Grab some more of my reds, maybe a little bit of purple. You know, as you move through your painting, try and connect colors. Definitely create some contrast, but maybe you have some similar colors reoccurring. Just have a darker version of a color that I'm going on top of. And you can use pretty much any color combinations for a painting like this. So you might have something altogether different than I've got going here. Get a little bit more of that dark happening up at the top here. Same brush stroke, you know, occasionally I'll move into that scrubbing motion just to soften some edges or kind of connect things with that first layer. And then I'll go back to that sort of walking or wandering brush stroke where I just twist and roll the brush on the canvas to get very irregular edges. I'll move around the canvas so that I can have some variety and not overwork any one area. Okay, so that second layer started to create some more formations, created some contrast. That creates some depth and some space. Clean off my brush here one more time. Now I'll just go back on top of some of that and maybe just create some little highlights or just another layer of an alternate color. You know, I'm staying in the same color group. I don't change too drastically, but just I'm trying to create the illusion of some different surfaces here. If this is all cloud or gas formations, there's going to be all sorts of little peaks and valleys and ridges and areas that are catching light and other areas that are deep in shadow. I don't have to be real literal or specific with where those spots are, but once again, it's all about just seeing what's happening in your painting and trying to pull things out that are emerging and accentuate them, or kind of go over things that are flat or dull and bring them out a little bit. So if I have some of these lighter shades of red and purple here, I throw them on top of or nearby some of these dark spots, and it creates some cool contrast, creates the illusion of some space and some depth. Just kind of wander around with that color here and there. This is where it's handy to have a nice assortment of pre-mixed colors. You can certainly pull this off working with primaries or a limited palette, but you could certainly also struggle to match your colors and have consistency through your painting. A few more areas of highlight here. So painting like this, every painter is going to get a different result, and that's the idea, is that you have complete control over what happens, what colors go where, and where the bright spots are, where the dark spots are, and what sort of formations you end up with. So you could take that really far and keep layering more colors, and you know, maybe I'll end up doing that later on with this painting, but I'm just going to throw in some more steps here for the sake of a watchable video. And I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. You know, it's not anything fancy, just a flat brush here, and I'll use it in that same way, but what I want to create is just some other little spots of color where I can create the illusion of some stars or some light that's glowing. And what I want to do is just take a little bit of paint and just use that same scrubbing motion, but keep it a little bit more under control. And I'm not drawing circles, but I'm creating these little pockets of a highlight and just trying to make them as soft as I can. If these are bright, hard edge circles, they're not going to look like glowing light. So I'm doing my best to just use a soft touch and light colors when I do this. So a little bit of white and then whatever color I'm trying to connect it to. And it's helpful to just use a little bit of paint on your brush when you do this too. Same reason, if you bring a whole load of paint on the brush to the canvas, it's got to go somewhere. And usually it's hard to make it look soft when there's a whole bunch of paint on the canvas. Alright, so a few more pockets of color here and there. Little highlights. Okay, and you could go to town with those too, depending on how big your painting is or how many different colors you have or what's happening in your painting. Put those wherever you like. Definitely can make things come to life. So I've got those spots where I have some glowing light. If I go to a fine brush, just a fine tipped brush here, and you could use the back of a brush or a corner of a larger brush, and you take your bright color for your star. In this case I'm just using bright white. Find those little glowing areas that you have and just set that nice bright white star inside of that glowing effect that you created. And your painting should start to come to life with light. And your stars could be all sorts of different colors depending on what's surrounding them or what color you use to create that glowing effect. And then you can go to town building in these stars all over your painting. And this doesn't necessarily have to be the last step. You could put in a handful of these stars and then build some more color on top of them, even overlap them with some more of that cloud effect. And then you could keep building on top of that. You can intertwine these layers any number of times. When I'm building stars into a painting, I'm just always trying to be random with the placement of them. Avoid making a pattern or a polka dot. Maybe slightly different sizes. It can be tough when you're trying to keep them all pretty small, but just little differences will show up in the end product. Maybe I use some different color, a little bit of light blue with my white. I could have some lighter blue stars. So you should get the idea with that. As far as putting stars on there, that's pretty straightforward. And then one other trick to creating some stars in your painting, I like to use a toothbrush. You could use a regular paintbrush, maybe one that you don't need to hold its shape too much because you're kind of fraying the bristles. But if I take a little bit of water on that brush and a little bit of paint, my star color, white in this case, and then just thumb through those bristles, you can create a whole bunch of tiny stars really fast. These probably don't show up on the screen very well, but on your painting you will see a really cool effect of stars, and you can cluster them in any particular area pretty easily this way. The trick to this technique is just finding the right ratio of water to paint. Too much water and you're going to kind of have a mess, maybe even some drips or splatters on your canvas. Too little and that paint might not fly off the brush at all, or if it does, it might come off in big globs or stringy chunks, which might not make your night sky look very pretty. And you can throw however many millions of stars you want in your outer space scene. And that ought to do it. You could definitely take a painting like this a lot further with more layers, more colors, more stars. That's what makes these paintings so fun, is that there's really no end point. It's totally up to you you decide what's going to look cool, and you could keep playing with this without messing it up or doing something that you couldn't easily incorporate or repair. So thanks for checking out this video. I hope this helps with your painting adventures.